on a crystalline September morning in 2007, in a town where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and children rode bicycles down gravel roads without supervision, a mother made a telephone call that would shatter the quiet rhythm of life in rural Montana. Her voice, steady at first, then cracking, reported that her husband and their 2-year-old daughter were missing. They had gone fishing before dawn at a remote alpine lake 23 miles from their home, she explained to the dispatcher. They should have returned hours ago. The sun was climbing toward noon, and the silence from the mountains had become unbearable. Within hours, search teams would comb forests and drag lake beds. Within days, they would find a body. Within weeks, they would begin to wonder if the person they were searching with was the person they should have been searching for. But it would take nearly 8 years, a dissolution of a marriage, and the haunting words of a child who had been too young to speak, to answer the question that hung over that community like morning fog. What really happened at Crystal Lake on September 15, 2007? The town of Whitefish, Montana, sits in the northwestern corner of the state, cradled between the Whitefish Range to the north and the Swan Range to the south. Population 3,700 in 2007. The kind of place where the high school football games drew a third of the town, where the same families had operated the same businesses for 3 generations, where everyone knew which roads turned to impassable mud in spring, and which trails led to the best huckleberry patches come August. The economy ran on timber, tourism, and the railroad that cut through town like a steel vein. Winters buried the valley under snow that sometimes lasted until May. Summers exploded with wildflowers and brought tourists who stayed at the lodges near Glacier National Park, 25 miles north. Robert and Jennifer Caldwell lived on Birch Street in a modest ranch house painted pale yellow with white trim. Robert, 31 years old, worked as a diesel mechanic at the Burlington Northern Rail Yard. Tall, 6'2", with the build of someone who spent his days hauling heavy equipment. Sandy hair he kept military short. A quiet man, those who knew him said. Not unfriendly, but not the type to linger at community gatherings. Jennifer, 28, worked part-time at the elementary school library. Small-framed, dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. They had married young, both 21, in a ceremony at the Lutheran Church on 2nd Avenue. Their daughter, Lynn Caldwell, had just turned 2 years old on September 3rd. Blonde curls, blue eyes, the kind of toddler who waved at strangers in the grocery store. She attended daycare 3 mornings a week at Little Lamb's preschool on Central Avenue while Jennifer worked. The teachers there would later say she was developing normally, spoke in short sentences, loved the sandbox, drew circles and lines with crayons but had not yet progressed to recognizable shapes. Clears throat. Friday, September 14, 2007, unfolded like any ordinary late summer day in Whitefish. The temperature reached 68 degrees, clear skies, a gentle wind from the west carrying the scent of pine and the first whisper of autumn. Jennifer Caldwell worked her morning shift at the library, returning home just after noon. Robert had taken the day off from the rail yard. He told his supervisor on Thursday that he wanted to take his daughter fishing one last time before the cold arrived. His supervisor, Martin Hayes, would later recall this conversation with perfect clarity. He seemed normal, Hayes told investigators. Said he wanted to get up to Crystal Lake before the snow closed the road. That evening the family ate dinner together, spaghetti. Jennifer would remember placing Amber in her high chair, remember the sauce on her daughter's chin, remember Robert eating quietly, scrolling through something on his phone between bites. After dinner, Robert carried Amber to the bathtub. Jennifer cleaned the kitchen. She could hear splashing, hear her daughter's laughter through the wall, normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of 1,000 other evenings. Robert put Amber to bed at 7:30. Jennifer read her a story, Good Night Moon, the same book they read most nights. Amber fell asleep holding a stuffed rabbit with one torn ear. The house settled into evening quiet. Jennifer watched television in the living room. Robert went to the garage, said he needed to organize his fishing gear for the morning. At some point near 9, Jennifer went to bed. She would later say she thought Robert came to bed around 10, but she had been asleep, could not be certain. The alarm clock showed 4:45 when it began to beep on Saturday morning, September 15th. Robert was already awake, already dressed. Jeans, flannel shirt, his worn Carhartt jacket. He moved through the dark house gathering his tackle box, his rod, a small red cooler. Jennifer got up to make coffee. The kitchen light seemed harsh after the darkness. Robert poured coffee into a thermos. He asked if she wanted to come along. She declined, said she had errands to run, had promised to help at the church rummage sale that afternoon. She would regret that decision for the rest of her life. Robert lifted Amber from her crib just after 5 in the morning. The child stirred but did not fully wake as he carried her to his truck, a 1999 Ford F-150, dark blue, Wyoming plates though they had moved to Montana 3 years prior. He strapped her into her car seat, which faced forward in the extended cab behind the driver's seat. She wore pink pajamas with white flowers. He draped a blanket over her. Jennifer stood in the doorway, the porch light creating a yellow circle in the pre-dawn darkness. She watched the truck's taillights disappear down Birch Street, turn left onto Highway 93, heading north. She would be the last person besides Robert to see Amber alive. Crystal Lake sits at an elevation of 4,900 feet in the Flathead National Forest. The access road, Forest Service Road 113, branches off Highway 93 approximately 11 miles north of Whitefish. The road is gravel, narrow, winding upward through dense lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. In good conditions, the drive takes 40 minutes. The lake itself is small, perhaps 15 acres, formed by glacial action thousands of years ago. The water is cold year-round, fed by snowmelt and underground springs. The depth reaches 70 feet in the center. In September, the surface temperature hovers around 52 degrees. Robert Caldwell had fished Crystal Lake many times. He knew the access points, knew where the cutthroat trout congregated near the inlet stream on the eastern shore. A few other vehicles were usually present on weekend mornings during fishing season, but September saw fewer visitors. The aspens had begun to turn gold. The mornings carried frost. According to Robert's later statement to law enforcement, he arrived at Crystal Lake shortly before 6:30. The sun had just cleared the ridge to the east, painting the water silver and pink. He parked in the small gravel lot near the trailhead. Amber was still sleeping. He unloaded his gear, carrying the tackle box and rod down the short trail to the shore, perhaps 100 yards. He returned for Amber, lifting her from the car seat. She woke then, he said, rubbed her eyes, asked for Mama. He carried her to the shore, set her on a flat rock near where he planned to fish. What happened next depends entirely on which version of events one chooses to believe. By 11 o'clock that same morning, Jennifer Caldwell was beginning to feel the first threads of worry weaving through her chest. Robert had said they would return by mid-morning. Amber would be hungry, would need a nap. Jennifer tried his cell phone. No service. Not unusual in the mountains. She tried again at 11:30, again at noon. The church rummage sale began at 1. She called Robert's phone 6 times between noon and 12:45. At 1:15, Jennifer Caldwell called the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher, a woman named Carol Peterson who had worked the desk for 11 years, later described Jennifer's voice as controlled but frightened. Jennifer explained the situation calmly. Her husband had taken their daughter fishing early that morning. They had not returned. She did not know exactly which lake. He had mentioned Crystal Lake the night before, but sometimes he changed his mind, went to different spots. The dispatcher asked standard questions. What was he driving? Dark blue Ford F-150. License plate. Jennifer had to check the registration in the kitchen drawer. Montana plates now, she corrected. They had just changed them in August. Plate number XCT4892. What was he wearing? What was the child wearing? Jennifer's voice broke when describing Amber's pink pajamas. Deputy Marcus Hale took the call at 1:22 in the afternoon. A veteran of the Sheriff's Department for 16 years, Hale had worked dozens of missing person cases, most of which resolved within hours. Lost hikers, confused elderly individuals, teenagers who had snuck away to drink by the river. He drove to the Caldwell residence first, arriving at 1:45. Jennifer stood on the porch, arms crossed despite the mild temperature. She looked small, Hale would later note in his report, worried but holding together. She showed him a photograph of Amber, a professional portrait taken at J.C. Penney the previous Christmas. Blonde curls, blue dress, gap-toothed smile. She described the truck, gave him the license number again, told him about Crystal Lake. Hale radioed for additional units and began organizing a search operation. By 2:30, 3 sheriff's vehicles were en route to Crystal Lake. The Forest Service was notified. A search and rescue coordinator from Kalispell, 35 miles south, began assembling a team. The day remained clear, temperature climbing to 71 degrees. Good visibility. No weather complications. Deputy Hale reached Crystal Lake at 2:58 in the afternoon. The gravel parking area was empty except for one vehicle, a dark blue Ford F-150, Montana plates, XCT4892. The truck was locked. Hale peered through the windows, a car seat in the back empty, no visible signs of distress or struggle, no note on the windshield. He circled the vehicle, checking the ground. Tire tracks in the gravel recent, matching the truck's tread. Nothing unusual. He called out, his voice carrying across the still water. No response. The lake reflected the sky like polished glass. A raven called from the trees. 2 more deputies arrived within 15 minutes. They began searching the shoreline, following the trail that circled the lake. The trail was well maintained, 2 miles in circumference. Dense forest on one side, water on the other. They called out names. Robert, Amber. Their voices echoed back from across the lake. At 3:41 in the afternoon, Deputy Sarah Chen, who had been searching the eastern shore near the inlet stream, spotted something on the rocks at the water's edge. A small pink shape. She approached carefully, her boots crunching on the gravel. A child's blanket, pink with white flowers, soaked, clinging to the stones. She keyed her radio immediately. The search intensified. More deputies arrived. The Forest Service sent 2 rangers. By 4:30, 23 people were combing the area. Some walked the shoreline. Others waded into the shallows, the cold water shocking even through waders. 2 individuals in a small inflatable boat began dragging the deeper sections with grappling hooks. At 5:17 in the afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the western ridge, Deputy Marcus Hale found Robert Caldwell. He was sitting on a fallen log approximately 200 yards from the parking area on the southern shore of the lake. He was soaking wet. His clothes clung to him. Water dripped from his hair. His boots squished when he moved. He was staring at the lake, his face blank, his hands resting on his knees. Hale approached slowly. Robert Caldwell. Robert looked up. His eyes were red but dry. He nodded. "Where is your daughter?" Robert's mouth opened, closed. He looked back at the water. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "She's gone. She fell in. I tried. I couldn't find her." The search for Amber Caldwell's body would continue until full darkness at 8:43 that evening. It would resume at dawn the next morning. Divers from the Montana Highway Patrol arrived on Sunday, September 16th, bringing underwater equipment and specialized training. The water was clear but dark, visibility limited below 30 feet. The temperature was dangerously cold. Divers worked in 20-minute rotations. At 11:37 on Sunday morning, a diver named Thomas Ruiz located a small body in 62 feet of water, approximately 30 yards from the eastern shore. Part 2. The investigation. The recovery of Amber Caldwell's body transformed what had been a frantic search into a methodical investigation. The child was brought to the surface at 11:53 on Sunday morning. She still wore pink pajamas, now darkened by water and silt. Her blonde hair floated around her face. One small shoe, a white canvas sneaker, remained on her left foot. The right shoe was missing. Deputy Marcus Hale, who watched the recovery from the shore, would later tell investigators that he had worked in law enforcement for 16 years and that moment remained the hardest of his career. Several volunteers who had searched through the night turned away. A woman sobbed openly. Robert Caldwell, who had spent the night in the patrol car at the parking area under informal supervision, stood 20 feet from the water's edge. He swayed slightly, as if the ground beneath him was unsteady. His face showed no expression. He did not cry. He did not move toward the small form being placed carefully on the shore. "I have seen grief many times," Hale wrote in his notes that evening. "This was not grief, this was absence." The Flathead County coroner, Dr. Patricia Hammond, arrived at Crystal Lake at 12:15. She was a precise woman, 62 years old, who had held the position for 18 years. She performed a preliminary examination at the scene, documenting water temperature, air temperature, the condition of the body. Amber's skin was pale, the lips blue-tinged. There were no obvious signs of trauma to the head or torso, no defensive wounds on the hands. Dr. Hammond noted the time the body had been submerged, approximately 19 hours, and the water temperature, 51 degrees. The body was transported to Kalispell Regional Medical Center, where a full examination would be conducted the following morning. Robert Caldwell was asked to accompany deputies to the Flathead County Sheriff's Office for questioning. He was not under arrest. He was not read his rights. The deputies explained that they needed to understand exactly what had happened. Robert nodded. He rode in the back of Deputy Hale's vehicle, silent, staring out the window at the passing forest. The interview room at the sheriff's office was small, painted institutional beige, containing a metal table and 4 chairs. A camera mounted in the corner recorded everything. Robert sat down at 2:47 in the afternoon. Deputy Hale sat across from him. Detective James Cartwright from the Criminal Investigation Division joined them at 3 o'clock. Cartwright was 48, a methodical investigator who had worked in Montana law enforcement for 24 years. The interview lasted 3 hours and 12 minutes. Robert described the morning in a flat, mechanical voice. He had woken at 4:30, dressed, gathered his fishing gear. Jennifer had made coffee. He had carried Amber to the truck around 5. She was mostly asleep. He drove to Crystal Lake, arriving just before 6:30. He parked. He unloaded his tackle box and rod first, carried them to the shore. Then he returned for Amber. "Was she awake then?" Detective Cartwright asked. "Yes, she woke up when I lifted her out." "What did she say?" "She asked for her mother. I told her Mama was at home. I carried her down to the rocks." "Then what happened?" Robert paused. His hands lay flat on the table. "I was setting up my rod, getting the line ready. She was sitting on the rock behind me. I had my back to her, maybe 2 minutes. I heard a splash." "You heard a splash?" "Yes." Did she cry out? I don't remember. You don't remember if your daughter made a sound when she fell into the water? It happened fast. I turned around and she was gone. I saw ripples. I ran to the edge. I could see her under the water. She was sinking. I jumped in. Robert described diving repeatedly, searching the murky bottom, the water so cold it felt like knives. He could not find her. He could not see her. He stayed in the water, he claimed, for nearly an hour. Maybe longer. He lost track of time. He finally gave up, climbed out, collapsed on the shore. Why didn't you call for help? Cartwright asked. My phone was in the truck. I was in shock. I don't know, I couldn't think straight. You sat by the lake for 8 hours before we found you. I was waiting. I thought maybe she would float up. I don't know what I was thinking. Detective Cartwright leaned back in his chair. He had reviewed hundreds of statements in his career. He had developed an instinct for when words and truth diverged. Something in Robert's account felt scripted, rehearsed. The timeline bothered him. The details bothered him. But grief was strange, he knew. Trauma did unpredictable things to memory and behavior. Robert, did you hurt your daughter? Robert's eyes met Cartwright's for the first time. No, it was an accident, she fell. The interview ended at 6:14 in the evening. Robert was released. He had not requested a lawyer. He had answered every question. There was no evidence of foul play beyond the instincts of experienced investigators who felt something was wrong. Dr. Patricia Hammond conducted the full examination of Amber Caldwell's body on Monday morning, September 17th. Jennifer Caldwell, accompanied by her sister who had driven up from Missoula, formally identified the body at 8:45. Jennifer collapsed when she saw her daughter on the steel table. The sound she made, Dr. Hammond would later recall, was not quite human. The medical findings were documented in a 14-page report. Amber Caldwell had drowned. Water was present in the lungs. There were no signs of physical abuse. No broken bones. No bruises except minor ones on the arms and legs consistent with normal toddler activity. No signs of strangulation or suffocation. The toxicology screen was negative. Time of death was estimated between 6:30 and 9:30 on Saturday morning, based on water temperature and the condition of the body. But there were details that troubled Dr. Hammond. The lack of abrasions or defensive wounds seemed unusual for a child who had supposedly struggled in the water. The position in which the body was found, face down, arms at the sides, suggested she had sunk straight down rather than thrashing. And there was a small detail that Dr. Hammond noted in her report. A faint pattern of bruising on the upper back, 4 small marks approximately finger-width apart, too faint to photograph clearly but visible under certain lighting. She called Detective Cartwright that afternoon. I cannot say definitively that this was anything other than accidental drowning, she told him. But if you ask me to stake my professional reputation on that conclusion, I would hesitate. The investigation expanded quietly. Deputies retraced Robert's route from his house to Crystal Lake, checking gas stations, convenience stores, any location with security cameras. A clerk at a Shell station on Highway 93 remembered a blue Ford truck stopping around 6 in the morning. A man had purchased coffee and a breakfast sandwich. He had a small child with him. The clerk remembered because the child was crying, reaching for something, and the man seemed irritated. Investigators measured the distance from the Caldwell residence to Crystal Lake, 23.4 miles. Driving at normal speeds, allowing for the winding mountain road, the trip should take between 35 and 42 minutes. Robert claimed he left home just after 5 and arrived at the lake before 6:30. The timeline fit. Deputies searched the Caldwell home on Wednesday, September 19th, with Jennifer's consent. They found nothing unusual. The house was clean, organized. Amber's room contained a crib, toys, books. The garage held Robert's tools, fishing equipment, vehicle maintenance supplies. Jennifer's computer showed searches for toddler activities, library events, recipes. Robert's computer history showed fishing websites, weather forecasts, sports scores. The only item that gave investigators pause was a life insurance policy. Robert and Jennifer had purchased policies through Northwestern Mutual in 2006. They each had $50,000 policies on themselves. Robert had also taken out a $25,000 policy on Amber. The insurance agent, a woman named Diane Foster, confirmed that Robert had initiated the policy on Amber. He said he wanted to make sure they could cover funeral expenses if anything happened, Foster told investigators. It's not uncommon. A lot of young parents do it. But $25,000 seemed high for a 2-year-old. The community of Whitefish responded to Amber's death with the familiar rituals of small-town tragedy. A memorial fund was established at Mountain Bank. The elementary school where Jennifer worked planted a tree in Amber's memory. The Lutheran Church held a service on September 22nd, a Saturday, exactly 1 week after Amber disappeared. More than 300 people attended. Robert sat in the front row, wearing a dark suit. He did not speak. He stared at the small white casket throughout the service. Those who sat near him said he did not cry. Jennifer's family, her sister and parents who had driven from Missoula, sat on the opposite end of the pew. The physical distance seemed intentional. After the service, Robert did not attend the burial. He told Jennifer he could not bear it. Jennifer buried their daughter at Whitefish Cemetery on a hillside overlooking the valley. The grave marker read, Amber Lynn Caldwell, September 3, 2005, September 15, 2007. Beloved daughter. The sky held forever in her eyes. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, you understand the peculiar torment of suspicion without proof. Jennifer Caldwell began to doubt on the 3rd day after Amber's death. Small things at first. The way Robert seemed relieved when investigators left. The way he slept soundly while she lay awake. The fact that he had taken Amber fishing alone despite knowing the child could not swim, despite Jennifer's repeated requests that he keep Amber in sight at all times near water. She replayed the morning of September 15th endlessly in her mind. Robert asking if she wanted to come, her declining. Had he wanted a witness or had he wanted her to stay behind? She remembered him organizing his tackle box the night before, remembered him seeming distracted, remembered wondering if something was bothering him. She had not asked. She had gone to bed. The investigation continued through October and into November. Detective Cartwright interviewed everyone Robert had worked with, everyone who knew the family. The picture that emerged was of a quiet, unremarkable man. He showed up for work on time, did his job, went home. He drank occasionally, beer with coworkers on Fridays sometimes, but never to excess. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no extramarital affairs that anyone knew about. But there were small observations that accumulated like snow. A coworker mentioned that Robert had seemed stressed about money, had mentioned wanting to find a higher-paying job. Another recalled Robert saying once that fatherhood was harder than he expected. A neighbor remembered seeing Robert seem impatient with Amber when she cried, remembered him raising his voice, though never violently. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves that the case felt wrong. The official ruling remained accidental drowning. There was no evidence to contradict Robert's account. The life insurance policy paid out in December, $25,000. Robert deposited the check without comment. The marriage, already strained by grief, began to fracture in ways both visible and hidden. Jennifer and Robert spoke less. They slept in separate rooms. Jennifer could not look at him without seeing her daughter being carried to the truck in the pre-dawn darkness. Robert withdrew further, spending long hours at work or in the garage. Clears throat. By February of 2008, 5 months after Amber's death, the investigation had gone cold. Detective Cartwright maintained the file. He reviewed it periodically, but without new evidence, without a witness, without anything beyond the instinct that something was wrong, there was nowhere to go. The case joined the unfortunate category of deaths that would never feel resolved, never feel complete. In March, Jennifer filed for legal separation. In May, she filed for divorce. Part 3. The silence. Time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes it simply buries them under the accumulated debris of continuing life. The years after Amber's death passed with the steady, indifferent rhythm of seasons changing and seasons returning. Jennifer Caldwell moved to Missoula in June of 2008, relocating to be near her family. She found work at the public library. She rented a small apartment on the south side of town. She existed more than she lived. Robert remained in Whitefish. The divorce was finalized in August of 2008. The house on Birch Street was sold. Robert moved to a smaller rental, a duplex on the east side of town. He continued working at the rail yard. His coworkers said he seemed the same, quiet, competent, unremarkable. The weight of the unspoken suspicion settled over both their lives like a fog that never lifted. Jennifer attended grief counseling. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Klein, specialized in traumatic loss. Jennifer sat in the office on Thursday afternoons and talked about her daughter, about the guilt, about wondering if she could have prevented it somehow, about the terrible question that lived in her chest. Had her husband taken their daughter to that lake knowing she would not return? "I cannot prove it," Jennifer told Dr. Klein during a session in October of 2008. "But I know in the way you know when someone is lying. I know in the way you know when something is fundamentally wrong. He was too calm, too prepared for it. Does that make me crazy?" Dr. Klein did not answer directly. "Grief and suspicion can coexist," she said gently, "and sometimes we will never have the answers we need." For those who have ever doubted someone you love, someone you shared a home and a life with, you understand the particular isolation of that doubt. Jennifer could not voice her suspicions publicly without proof. To accuse Robert openly would make her seem vindictive, a bitter ex-wife seeking blame for a terrible accident. So she carried the suspicion silently, and it hollowed her out from the inside. The years accumulated. 2009 became 2010. 2010 became 2011. Whitefish continued its rhythms. Tourists arrived each summer. Snow buried the valley each winter. Children grew older. New families moved to town. Old families moved away. The Caldwell case faded from daily conversation, remembered only during quiet moments when someone drove past the cemetery, when someone saw a child with blonde curls, when someone mentioned Crystal Lake. Robert Caldwell's life appeared to stabilize. He received a promotion at the rail yard in 2011, becoming a shift supervisor. He bought a small house on the outskirts of town in 2012. He dated occasionally, brief relationships that never progressed to anything serious. Those who knew him casually would have described him as a man who had experienced tragedy and moved forward. Resilient, perhaps. Private, certainly. But there were moments, small fractures in the facade, that suggested otherwise. A coworker named Danny Reeves recalled an incident in 2013. They had been working on a diesel engine together when a child's laughter echoed from somewhere outside the yard. Robert had frozen, his hand stopping mid-motion. His face had gone pale. The moment passed quickly, but Reeves remembered thinking it was the first genuine emotion he had seen from Robert in years. Jennifer in Missoula built a different kind of life. She adopted a dog in 2011, a golden retriever she named Sunny. She volunteered at a crisis center. She attended her nieces' and nephews' birthday parties and school events. She smiled at appropriate times. She laughed when expected. But anyone who looked closely could see the hollow space behind her eyes, the place where her daughter should have been. She visited Amber's grave on the 15th of each month, made the 2-hour drive from Missoula to Whitefish, brought flowers, sat on the grass beside the small headstone. Sometimes she talked aloud, telling her daughter about the changing seasons, about books she had read, about nothing in particular. The words did not matter. The ritual mattered. On one of these visits in September of 2014, 7 years after Amber's death, Jennifer saw Robert's truck parked on the road near the cemetery. She did not see him among the graves. She did not look for him. She left quickly, her heart pounding, her hands shaking on the steering wheel as she drove away. They had not spoken since the divorce was finalized in 2008. The psychological weight of carrying unresolved trauma is difficult to quantify. It manifests in nightmares, in hypervigilance, in the inability to trust. Jennifer's therapist noted in her files that Jennifer experienced symptoms consistent with complicated grief and post-traumatic stress. Difficulty sleeping, intrusive thoughts, an overwhelming sense that something important remained incomplete. In 2012, Jennifer had begun keeping a journal, writing down everything she remembered about the days and weeks before Amber's death. She filled notebook after notebook with observations. Robert had seemed distracted in early September. He had mentioned money troubles. He had taken Amber fishing despite knowing the dangers. He had organized his tackle box the night before with unusual care. He had asked Jennifer if she wanted to come, a question he had never asked before. Small details. Meaningless individually, but together they formed a pattern that felt deliberate. She kept the notebooks in a box under her bed. She did not know what she planned to do with them. She only knew that writing it down made it real, made it something more than her own festering doubt. The years between 2008 and 2015 passed in this manner. Two people living separate lives, connected only by the ghost of a child and the unspoken question of what really happened on a September morning beside a mountain lake. The marriage had dissolved into silence long before the legal documents made it official. But the silence itself was not empty. It was full of all the things that could not be said without evidence, without proof, without something beyond intuition and the cold observation that grief should not look like relief. In April of 2015, Jennifer received a phone call that would change everything. The caller was a woman named Patricia Simmons. She identified herself as a forensic psychologist specializing in cases involving children. She explained that she had been reviewing cold case files as part of a research project on childhood trauma and memory. The Caldwell case had caught her attention. "I would like to ask you some questions," Dr. Simmons said, "about your daughter, about the days before she died. Would you be willing to talk with me?" Jennifer agreed immediately. They met at a coffee shop in Missoula on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Simmons was in her 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. She explained that she was particularly interested in cases where very young children might have witnessed or experienced trauma, but had been too young to articulate what happened. "Your daughter was 2 years old," Dr. Simmons said, "too young to testify, too young to give a coherent account, but not too young to remember on some level. The question is whether that memory could ever surface in a useful way." Jennifer felt something shift in her chest. "Do you think something happened to her before the drowning?" "I think," Dr. Simmons said carefully, "that the circumstances warrant more scrutiny than they received. And I think that sometimes the truth lives in details we initially overlooked." Over the next 3 months, Dr. Simmons reviewed the case file, interviewed Jennifer multiple times, and examined every piece of available evidence. She noted the same inconsistencies that had troubled the original investigators. She noted Robert's unusual composure. She noted the timeline, the life insurance, the lack of defensive wounds on Amber's body. But it was Dr. Simmons who first suggested a possibility that had not been seriously explored. What if Amber had not been alone when she died? The bruising pattern on her back, Dr. Simmons said during a meeting in July of 2015. 4 small marks. Your daughter was held underwater, Jennifer. Those marks are fingerprints. Part 4. The Revelation. The truth began to surface not with dramatic revelations or sudden confessions, but with the slow, methodical accumulation of re-examined evidence and the recognition that the most important witness had been too young to speak. Dr. Patricia Simmons's analysis reached the Flathead County Sheriff's Office in August of 2015. Detective James Cartwright, who had never fully closed the mental file on Amber Caldwell's death, read the report 3 times. The medical examiner's photographs from 2007 were re-examined by a forensic pathologist at the Montana State Crime Lab. Dr. Michael Torres specialized in pattern injury analysis. He studied the faint bruising on Amber's upper back under enhanced imaging techniques that had not been available in 2007. His report, filed on September 2, 2015, stated with medical certainty that the bruising pattern was consistent with digital pressure. 4 points of contact, adult-sized fingers, applied with force sufficient to hold a small child in position. This child was restrained, Dr. Torres wrote. The positioning and pattern indicate she was held face down, likely in water, by someone applying pressure to her upper back and shoulder blades. On September 3, 2015, 8 years to the day after Amber would have turned 2 years old, Detective Cartwright reopened the investigation as a potential homicide. The challenge facing investigators was substantial. 8 years had passed. Physical evidence was limited. The primary suspect had maintained his innocence consistently. There were no witnesses, no confession, no newly discovered physical evidence beyond the reanalysis of photographs that had existed all along. But there was one avenue that had never been fully explored: the possibility of additional witnesses who might have been at Crystal Lake that morning. A deputy named Christina Vargas was assigned to track down everyone who had visited Crystal Lake during the month of September 2007. She combed through Forest Service records, contacted fishing license holders, reviewed social media posts and photo-sharing websites. It was painstaking work. Most visitors were tourists who had long since left Montana. Many could not remember specific dates. But in November of 2015, Deputy Vargas located a man named Gregory Ashton, who had been camping at a site 3 miles from Crystal Lake on the weekend of September 15, 2007. He was a nature photographer from Seattle who made annual trips to Montana. He had kept detailed journals of his travels.